Okay, so you want to own an electric vehicle charging station. And the arithmetic looks almost embarrassing at first glance. Commercial electricity in the United States averaged about 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour as of May 2026. Public fast charging averaged around 53 cents across 2025. Buy at 13, sell at 53. No refinery, no pipeline, no tanker fleet standing between you and the product. The pumps never run dry, and the supplier is a wire. There are now more than 253,000 public charging ports in this country across roughly 82,000 locations, up 15% in a single year. The category is growing. The spread is enormous. Two things to hold on to before we go anywhere. The first is that there is a line on this business's electricity bill that has almost nothing to do with how much electricity it used. It is calculated from a single 15-minute window in the entire month, and it arrives whether or not one car plugged in. That one line is why a national laboratory found the cost of electricity at a fast charging site can range from under 10 cents per kilowatt hour to over $2. And in a separate multi-state study of low-use scenarios, the average cost per kilowatt hour ran between $5.37 and $28.62. $28 for a kilowatt hour that sells for 53 cents. The second is a pair of numbers that sit uncomfortably next to each other. The federal government committed $5 billion to build a national fast-charging network. By late 2025, that program had produced fewer than 400 operational ports. And in that same year, private capital built roughly 97% of all new fast chargers in America. $5 billion produced almost nothing, while the private market produced almost everything. Both of those facts point at the same mechanism, and it is the first thing I just described. We will get to both, but we start with the build, because the build is where every spreadsheet on this business goes wrong. Here is the thesis, and everything else is proof. A charging station does not sell electricity. It rents grid capacity by the month and then hopes enough cars show up to justify the rent. Let's start with putting one in the ground. A commercial level 2 charger, the slow kind, installs for somewhere between $4,500 and $12,000 per port. Direct current fast charging is a different species of project. A single 150 kilowatt port installs for roughly $90,000 to $150,000. 350 kilowatt hardware pushes past $200,000. And here is the detail that tells you what you are actually buying. The charger itself, the machine, is only about 20 to 35% of that installed cost. The rest is electrical and civil work, trenching, conduit, transformers, switchgear, permitting, and construction. You are not buying a piece of equipment. You are buying a connection to the grid, and the equipment is the small part. A 4-stall site of 150 kilowatt chargers needs 600 kilowatts delivered to a parking lot. That is roughly the electrical load of a small apartment building, arriving at a strip of asphalt that previously had a light pole on it. A peer-reviewed study of corridor charging economics projected that essentially every modeled corridor station would require a distribution transformer upgrade, with 80% of those needed during the initial build. So build the optimistic model, the one that raised billions of dollars. You sell at 53 cents a kilowatt hour. Your energy cost is 13. That is 40 cents of contribution on every kilowatt hour that moves through the machine. 4 ports, decent traffic, and the spreadsheet sings. Now, you could stop the video here, and you would already understand that pitch better than most people who invested in it. Everything so far is a straightforward markup on a commodity. The problem is that the 13-cent energy cost I just used is not a real number. It is an average wearing the costume of a price, and the gap between that costume and reality is the entire industry. Let's go find the line on the bill. Commercial electricity customers are not billed the way you are at home. At home, you pay for energy, kilowatt hours consumed, times a rate. A commercial site pays for 2 separate things. The first is energy, same as you. The second is a demand charge, billed in dollars per kilowatt of peak power per month. Here is how it is measured, and this mechanic decides everything. The utility watches your site in 15-minute intervals. It finds the single interval in the entire billing month where you drew the most power. Then it bills you for that number times a rate, regardless of how many hours you actually operated at that level. You are not being charged for electricity. You are being charged for the capacity the utility had to hold in reserve for you. Demand rates commonly run $10 to $20 or more per kilowatt per month. So a 350 kilowatt station under a $20 rate incurs roughly $7,000 in demand charges every month before a single kilowatt hour of energy is billed. Now apply that to a fast charger. The entire point of a 150 kilowatt charger is that it draws 150 kilowatts. If 2 run at once, your site touches 300. That 15-minute window sets your demand charge for the month. If that happens once, on a Tuesday afternoon in the first week, and the site is quiet for the next 3 weeks, you pay the full amount anyway. The utility reserved that capacity the entire time. An idle charger costs you almost exactly what a busy charger costs you. And the research on this is not ambiguous. A multi-state study across the Intermountain West found demand charges averaging just under 74% of the sampled fast charging bills. A landmark analysis by the Rocky Mountain Institute, which examined every session in a single year across all 230 of One Network's California stations, found demand charges responsible for over 90% of a station's electricity costs at low utilization. 90% of the electricity bill for capacity rather than energy. Which is why the same laboratory analysis produces that impossible-looking range, under 10 cents at high utilization, over $2 at low. So this is not an energy business. It is a utilization business, wearing an energy business costume. If you know somebody who thinks charging companies are simply waiting for more electric cars, this is the part to send them. More cars are necessary, but a charger used twice a day and a charger used 20 times a day face nearly identical fixed monthly costs, and only one of them is a business. So what utilization do you actually need? The Rocky Mountain Institute's rate design study concluded that stations can operate profitably under a typical utility tariff once utilization reaches roughly 30%. It also found that a 150 kilowatt charger breaks even under only about half of the utility rate structures studied, and that above 150 kilowatts, breaking even is nearly impossible, except where the utility has no demand charge at all. Read that last part again. The faster your hardware, the harder the economics, unless you are on a special tariff. Now the actual numbers. Independent trackers put average American fast charging utilization at around 13% in mid-2025, with another putting it near 16%. The largest independent network in the country reported its own public network at about 20% in the second quarter of 2026, and that figure was down from 22. 13 to 20%, against a profitability threshold estimated near 30. That single comparison explains most of what has happened to this sector, and it shows up plainly in the public filings. ChargePoint, in its fiscal year ending January 2026, reported revenue of $411 million, down 1%. With a GAAP net loss of $220 million and $142 million of cash. It executed a reverse stock split and cut around 10% of staff in March 2026. Blink Charging reported 2025 revenue of $103.5 million against a net loss of $83 million. Cut 38% of its workforce, and exited in-house manufacturing entirely. Evango is the most instructive because it is doing the best. In the second quarter of 2026, Evgo reported charging network revenue of $61 million, up 19%, on trailing throughput of 384 gigawatt hours. Its charging gross margin was 39% on a trailing basis. Management says the charging network itself, excluding corporate overhead, has been profitable since late 2023 and targets around $500 million of adjusted earnings by 2030. And in that same quarter, it reported an adjusted earnings loss of about $10.5 million. So the network can make money on the electrons. The company still cannot, because the corporate overhead, the depreciation on all that hardware, and the cost of building the next site sit on top. I am not saying this business cannot work. I am saying the best positioned independent operator in the country, running utilization at the top of the industry range with a genuinely healthy network margin, has not gotten there yet. Which brings us to the second thing I promised you. The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program allocated $5 billion to build fast charging along highway corridors, covering up to 80% of eligible project costs. Stations roughly every 50 miles, at least 4 150 kilowatt chargers, 97% uptime, open payment. By February 2025, about 57 stations had opened. By late 2025, at least 384 ports had been built. Now I want to be fair, because this number gets weaponized. A real part of the delay was administrative. The program was frozen in February 2025. A federal court ruled that freeze illegal with final judgment in January 2026, and $885 million was apportioned for the 2026 fiscal year. Money apportioned is not money spent, and a great deal is committed to projects still in construction. But here is the comparison that actually matters. In 2025, chargers funded by that program were roughly 3% of all new fast charging added in America. Private capital, led overwhelmingly by Tesla, built the other 97%. So the market is building. The subsidy mostly is not. And the reason is the mechanic we have already covered. Even when somebody else pays 80% of your capital, you still own the demand charge, the maintenance, the network fee, and the utilization risk every month, forever. Subsidy solves the build. It does not solve the month. Now the demand side, and here I want to give both sides, because the forecasting record on electric vehicles is genuinely poor. The bullish case is real, and it is global, but the American picture has changed sharply. After the federal purchase credits expired at the end of September 2025, battery electric vehicles fell to about 6% of new light-duty sales in the first half of 2026, down from 7%. First quarter sales were down 27% year over year. The second quarter ran about 25% below the year before. And watch what happened to the forecasts. Bloomberg's outlook for the American electric vehicle sales share in 2030 was 48% in its 2024 report, 27% in 2025, 17% in June 2026. 2 consecutive downgrades, and the number is now roughly a third of what it was 2 years ago. That is not a criticism of the forecaster. It is a warning about anyone, including me, who tells you where this is going. But the structural fact that matters most for a charging station is not the sales curve at all. Most charging does not happen in public. The International Energy Agency puts American home charging at about 83% of all charging, and notes that drivers charge privately, at home or at work, almost 75% of the time, while using public fast chargers only about 10% of the time. Looking forward, the agency projects that public charging points will be just 5% of total charger stock by 2035, with home at 60% and workplace and other private charging at 35%. 5% of the stock. And the price data tells drivers exactly why. Charging at home works out to roughly 6 cents a mile. Public charging, about 13. Anyone who can plug in at home has every reason to, and does. So public fast charging is not competing for the electric vehicle market. It is competing for road trips, for apartment dwellers with no dedicated parking, and for people who forgot. One more thing worth correcting, because the internet is behind on it. Charger reliability was genuinely bad, and it has genuinely improved. J.D. Power found in 2025 that 14% of owners visited a charger and left without successfully charging, down from 19% the year before, the best result in 4 years. But a session-level analysis of over 100,000 charging attempts found first-time success at only about 71%, falling from 85% at new stations to around 70% by the third year, even at sites reporting uptime above 98%. Both things are true. The experience is better than the reputation, and reported uptime still overstates whether the thing actually works when you pull up. Now the angle that runs the other direction. And it is the most interesting finding in this entire research. A gasoline fill-up takes about 4 minutes. A paid fast charging session, according to Department of Energy data, averages 42 minutes and 22 kilowatt-hours. For decades, the binding constraint on every fuel retailer in America was that the customer was on the property for 4 minutes, barely enough time to buy a coffee. Charging gives you 42. And that reframes who should be building these. If you are a charging company, 42 minutes is a stall occupied at a difficult margin. If you are a retailer, 42 minutes is a customer standing in your parking lot with nothing to do, which is exactly who is moving hardest into the category. Sheetz has installed more than 650 chargers across roughly 95 locations and has passed 2 million sessions. Wawa has over 210. A partnership between one major network, a truck stop chain, and an automaker reached more than 300 locations and around 1,300 stalls across 40 states by August 2026. Ayana, a joint venture backed by 8 automakers, had about 1,375 ports across 150 stations by August 2026 and targets 30,000 bays by 2030. Its stations are built as lounges with restrooms, seating, and food, co-located with convenience brands. And per foot traffic analysis reported this year, Buc-ee's has the longest dwell time of any convenience chain in America, roughly double its nearest competitor. That is not a charging strategy. That is a retail strategy that uses charging as the reason to stop. The margin on the electricity is hard. The margin on what somebody buys during 42 minutes of waiting is not, which suggests the profitable version of this business may not be a charging station with a store attached. It may be a store with chargers attached, where the chargers are a customer acquisition cost, exactly as fuel pumps have been for convenience stores for 30 years. So let's put a year on it, both ways. In the good scenario, you are a retailer with an existing site, existing traffic, and existing electrical service. Your chargers extend dwell time rather than standing alone as a profit center. You captured most of your capital cost through a program before the credits expired. You negotiated onto a utility rate schedule designed for charging. And your traffic exists because people were already coming. In that configuration, the chargers do not need to be profitable by themselves. They only need to cost less than the basket they generate. Much easier test, and it is why retailers are quietly winning this. In the realistic scenario, you built a standalone site. 4 150 kilowatt stalls. Installed cost around $130,000 per port, so $520,000 in the ground. Your site peak touches 300 kilowatts, and at $18 a kilowatt, that is $5,400 of demand charge every month. Here is the part that makes the whole business legible. At 5% utilization, that demand charge is $5,400. At 20% utilization, it is still $5,400. Identical, your revenue quadruples, and that line does not move at all. At 5%, your site contributes under $2,000 a month against $500,000 of capital in the ground. It is losing money, and it will keep losing money. Break even. once you include any reasonable capital recovery, sits somewhere around 10 to 15% utilization. And the national average is 13. Nothing broke. Your chargers work, your uptime is fine. You just discovered that you spent $500,000 to purchase a monthly bill for capacity, and that the electricity you sell is only a way of paying it down. That is the whole thing in one line. In almost every retail business, you buy inventory and sell it at a markup. And if nobody comes, at least you still have the inventory. Here, you buy availability, by the month, at a price set by your single busiest quarter hour. And if nobody comes, you have bought nothing at all. Which means the honest question was never whether Americans will drive electric cars. Millions already do, and over any long horizon, the direction is not really in dispute. The question is whether they will come to your specific parking lot often enough to justify a bill that arrives, whether they come or not, and whether you were ever really in the electricity business or in the business of giving somebody a reason to stand in your lot for 42 minutes. This video is general education about how an industry works, not business, financial, or investment advice. It takes no position on electric vehicle timelines or on subsidy policy. Both are presented with the evidence on each side. If you want the underlying figures, the Department of Energy publishes station counts and charging session data. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory publishes research on charging electricity costs and demand charges, and the public charging networks disclose utilization, throughput, and margins in their filings.